Hey guys, it's Zerx What If, and welcome to the final part of What If Yuji was like Garou. I don't know how long this one's going to be, but we'll see. So yeah, let's just get right into it. Continuing where we left off, Gojo had told Yuji that within the month, on December 24th, he would then fight Kenjaku. Yuji wondered why it was so far away, but Gojo would just say that he was going to train him for that month to make sure Yuji was absolutely ready to fight Kenjaku. Yuji would ask Gojo, was this actually even necessary? As Gojo would simply tell Yuji, he only wants to know where he stands, and to give him a couple of pointers just before he got into his battle. He would also remind Yuji that Kenjaku wasn't more of a hand-to-hand fighter like him. Kenjaku was going to use sneaky tactics and do anything he could to beat Yuji, so he had to be prepared. And on top of that, he's given another month to prepare, knowing exactly who he'll be fighting anyway. Yuji would then sigh and say, would it not be smarter for him to go and fight Kenjaku now, instead of giving him an entire month to prepare? Gojo would stare off at Yuji and just shrug his shoulders. This is when Yuji would say to himself, this is exactly why he refuses to join the Jujutsu sorcerers. But seeing as Gojo was still trying to get him stronger, he wasn't just going to let this chance go by. Gojo would tell Yuji that he wants him to attack him with everything that he's got. Gojo won't use Infinity, he simply wants Yuji to attack him. Yuji would cock back his fist, charging his fist with cursed energy. Gojo would scan Yuji up and down. He would realize Yuji's cursed energy control is absolutely amazing. Yuji was no longer that boy he was when Gojo first met him. Gojo would only smile as Yuji would throw his punch. Gojo would throw up his hand, blocking Yuji's attack. However, he would notice something about Yuji's cursed energy. As it connected with his hand, Gojo would notice tiny cuts along his hand where Yuji had struck. He would then look at Yuji and tell him that he thought he asked him to not hold back at all. Yuji would look up shocked and tell Gojo that he didn't want to hurt him after all. Gojo would say that it was fine and that he could go all out if he wanted to. Yuji would ask Gojo if he was absolutely sure. Gojo would simply put a big thumbs up and smile, telling Yuji that everything was a-okay. Yuji would then cock his fist back again, putting the max amount of cursed energy that he could into this attack. Gojo would notice the difference almost immediately. Yuji's cursed energy control was still absolutely phenomenal. Yuji would send the strike straight towards Gojo's hand, but this time it would be faster and stronger. As it would connect, Gojo could feel his hand being shredded. The second Yuji's fist connected with Gojo's hand, his cursed energy would have caused small slices to go all across Gojo's arms. Gojo would think to himself that the cuts themselves weren't deep. However, if the effect were to stack and Yuji were to hit you numerous times in the same place, it would only shred deeper and deeper. Gojo would smile, using reverse curse technique on his hand. But then, Gojo would realize something even more. Yuji's cursed energy sliced into his hands, but even while he was using reverse curse technique, it was as if the lingering cursed energy on his hand was still digging into him while he was trying to heal, slowing down the healing. Gojo would let off a big smile and tell Yuji that he didn't expect this out of him, and he can't believe how strong he's gotten in such a short amount of time. Gojo would then tell Yuji that he's going to train him for this entire month on how to effectively use his cursed energy trait, as well as attempt to teach him how to open a domain. If not a domain, at least something along the lines of that. He would tell Yuji to get ready because he wasn't going to take it easy on Yuji at all. For the entire month, Gojo would do nothing but push Yuji even harder, making sure his body was ready for the fight, seeing as he was sitting in a bath for a month. He didn't want Yuji to get any kind of rust on him. The day before the 24th of December, Gojo would tell Yuji that they were finally done training, and that today he needed rest because he had a big day tomorrow. Yuji would ask Gojo what exactly was he going to do with the other students, with Gojo saying they were going to attempt to clean up as many curses as they can. The entire time Yuji has been training, Megami and the others have been doing cursed spirit cleanup, as well as saving as many people as they can, so that there wouldn't be enough cursed energy generating within the barriers. Gojo would then tell Yuji that he's going to leave him to it now. He would tell Yuji to think about what he's going to do and how he's going to go about it. He would remind Yuji that Kenjaku is cunning and would do absolutely anything to get the win. Yuji would say that he knows and that he'll do anything in order to kill Kenjaku. This battle meant absolutely everything to Yuji. As Gojo would leave the room, Sukuna would open a mouth on Yuji's side, asking Yuji if he was absolutely ready. Yuji would say that he doesn't really have a choice now. Sukuna would ask Yuji if he was scared, with Yuji saying that he wasn't scared. However, He had to go through all these preparations to only be even to Kenjaku. Yuji believed he was extremely strong back then, on top of the world. It was only when Kenjaku had started the culling games he was able to see where he actually stood in the world of Jujutsu. Yuji would then tell Sukuna that this battle was more than just about killing Kenjaku. Everything was behind this, all of his emotions, everything. The only reason Yuji was able to live the life he was able to live was because of Kenjaku. Kenjaku planted that finger, which allowed the cursed spirits to run rampant inside of the orphanage. That moment allowed Yuji to unlock his cursed energy, which also allowed him to enter a world where things were even more exciting. It was something that Yuji was searching for his entire life, and Kenjaku allowed that to happen for him. However, at the same time, Kenjaku destroyed everything Yuji was fighting for, molded his brain into thinking that it was the Jujutsu sorcerer's fault for everything happening. Although he knows Yuta Kotu killed his teacher, it was simply because Yuta was protecting his ideals, and Geto simply fell because Yuta was stronger. However, it was after that moment, Kenjaku took over his teacher's body and planted in Yuji's mind seeds of doubt and attempted to turn him against everything, with Yuji wondering and asking Sukuna, what does he think would have happened if Yuji would have continued going down the path with Kenjaku? Would things be different? And would Yuji be where he's at right now? Sukuna would simply tell Yuji that he shouldn't be thinking about things like that, and that he should only be thinking about the choices that he made and where he's at now. He would tell Yuji that he was at the point he was at now simply because he found his own path and didn't follow someone else. The only reason he's here right now is simply because Yuji decided to follow himself and go after strength for himself and not because someone else told him to. If Yuji wasn't following the path that he was on currently right now, Sukuna wouldn't be here. Sukuna wouldn't have told Yuji to take the path, and Sukuna would not have helped Yuji at all in the slightest. He would tell Yuji to stand proud because he is strong, and the strength that he's gotten is from himself and no one else alone. And Yuji would smile as Sukuna would tell the boy to get some rest because tomorrow he has a big day ahead of him. Yuji wouldn't say it out loud, but inside of his head, he would thank Sukuna. As December 24th would come around, the tensions would be at an all-time high. Yuji would be walking with Urame by his side. Gojo would tell Yuji that him and Kenjaku were set to meet in Shinjuku. Yuji would have a serious look on his face, ready to die for his ideals, and ready to kill Kenjaku for everything he's ever done to him. Just then, Megami would walk over to Yuji. Looking Yuji straight in the eye, he would tell Yuji, show the Jujutsu world that you're strong, and don't die. And Yuji would look at Megami, and simply give off a smile. You know I have to come back and keep you in your place, so I can't die just yet. As Yuji would continue walking on, everyone would tell Yuji good luck and to not die. As Yuji would get to Gojo, as he would tell Yuji he was going to teleport him there, and that they were all going to be watching his fight. And when he kills Kenjaku, he'd better be prepared to fight even harder, because since Kenjaku has cursed spirit manipulation, once he dies, the cursed spirits inside of his body will be released all at once. The second that happens, Gojo will attempt to get as many sorcerers as he can to where Yuji is, to help him out and defeat all of the cursed spirits. And then Yuji could rest and they can do cleanup. Yuji would nod his head, as Gojo would tell him to grab onto him. Yuji would place his hand on Gojo's shoulder, as they would teleport right into the middle of Shinjuku, where Kenjaku would be sitting there, waiting. Kenjaku would stare at Yuji and realize this is what Gojo meant. Someone else would want his head. Kenjaku would simply let off a slight chuckle. He would look at Gojo and tell him, is this the person you had in mind? If so, I'm not worried about anything. Yuji's eye would twitch, realizing that Kenjaku took him for some kind of joke. Gojo would laugh and tell Kenjaku that he shouldn't be so cocky, because even if Yuji were to die here today, Kenjaku is still going to die regardless. Kenjaku would simply laugh and say that they'll see about that. He would tell Gojo that he shouldn't have given him a month to prepare, because things are looking brighter for Kenjaku. Kenjaku would begin to stand up, as Yuji would be doing nothing but staring darts into Kenjaku's soul. Gojo would then place his hand on Yuji's shoulder, as he would tell Yuji to not let Kenjaku get in his head, and that he can 100% win this. Yuji, without even looking at Gojo, would say that he knows, as Gojo would teleport away. Kenjaku would then begin to laugh and ask Yuji, is this exactly what he wanted? Kenjaku would tell Yuji that even if he were to somehow kill him today, there will be someone else to carry out his will. Yuji would tell Kenjaku to shut up and that he wasn't here to talk to him. Yuji would simply transform his body, going into his cursed form, as Kenjaku would have a shocked look on his face. He had never seen this from Yuji. He had seen the four-armed form from before, however, this was something else entirely. Yuji would waste no time. He would sprint straight in, as Kenjaku was expecting this. Kenjaku would summon a couple of cursed spirits, as well as one on the floor. Yuji, noticing the cursed spirit on the floor, would simply jump over it, attempting to land an attack on Kenjaku. Yuji would swing his leg, however, another cursed spirit would jump in the way of Yuji's attack, slamming into the cursed spirit, shredding it on impact. Kenjaku would be surprised yet again. That was at least a grade 1 cursed spirit, and Yuji was able to effortlessly defeat it just like that. Kenjaku would begin to smile, saying that he couldn't be any more proud of his son. Yuji would get angered by this comment. Yuji would land on the ground and scream at Kenjaku, saying that he wasn't his son. Sprinting in once more, they would begin hand-to-hand combat. Realizing off that one cursed spirit alone, Kenjaku would have to use cursed spirits as body armor in order to negate the effects of Yuji's cursed energy trait. However, at the same time, Kenjaku would realize that this may not be effective, seeing as Yuji just might be able to run through his collection of cursed spirits. Eventually, he will run out of lower grade cursed spirits and have to use the higher ones. He didn't want it to come down to that, so he would have to figure out something sooner than later. However, Yuji would simply continue his assault. Realizing that Kenjaku was going to use his cursed spirits as armor, he was going to play along. He would send a punch, hoping Kenjaku would block it, and Kenjaku would do exactly that. However, instead of simply just punching using his cursed energy, he would use cleave along with the punch, with the initial impact of the punch blowing the cursed spirit to smithereens. The cleave would travel through the cursed spirit, connecting with Kenjaku's arm. Kenjaku would smile, realizing that Yuji is already adapting to what he's doing, so he would have to switch it up, kicking it up a couple of notches already. Kenjaku would then summon multiple centipede-like cursed spirits and wrap them around his arms, as Yuji would attempt to do the same thing. However, just as Yuji's strike would connect, Kenjaku would throw his hands up, causing the centipede-like cursed spirit to fly straight at Yuji. Yuji would be forced to slap the cursed spirit out of the way. However, Kenjaku would capitalize off this, closing the distance between himself and Yuji. Grabbing his arm, he would pull him forward and strike Yuji in the face. However, Yuji would simply attempt to use cleave on Kenjaku's arm, the one that he had grabbed Yuji with. But Kenjaku was already one step ahead, using another centipede-like cursed spirit to wrap around his arm, as instead of connecting with Kenjaku's arm, it would connect with the centipede, shredding the centipede as Kenjaku would go forward with another punch, striking Yuji straight in his gut. This would push Yuji back, as Kenjaku would summon even more centipede-like curses, throwing them all at Yuji. Yuji would stomp his feet into the ground, bracing for impact, as the cursed spirits would crash into Yuji, beginning to skid off his blood-like armor. Kenjaku would begin to laugh, sprinting at Yuji, saying that if this was all he had, he was in for trouble. It took a month for Yuji to still be weak. He was absolutely pathetic. Yuji wouldn't say anything at all and simply concentrate, remembering what Gojo said and not letting Kenjaku get to his head. As Kenjaku would be in front of Yuji again, Kenjaku would attempt to throw another attack. However, Yuji would parry his attack, pushing it to the side. He would then stomp on the ground using cleave, causing the area around Kenjaku to be uneven. Using blood manipulation, Yuji would then use flowing red scale stack, stacking it on top of his transformation. As Kenjaku would attempt to back up, the footing below him would begin to crumble. As Yuji would rush forward, Kenjaku would attempt to throw a jab at Yuji. However, Yuji would grab it, pulling Kenjaku in and throwing 2 quick jabs at his face, with each attack having the cursed energy trait digging into Kenjaku's skin. Kenjaku would then think to himself, realizing that Yuji's cursed energy trait was troubling because it required him to use reverse curse technique. However, at the same time, the cuts themselves wouldn't just heal off regular reverse curse technique. He would have to constantly use it for the technique to dispel itself. It wasn't effective for Kenjaku because he would be running through his cursed energy supply. However, if he were to leave the strikes there, over time, if Yuji were to strike the same spot, the effects of the strike would stack up, leaving Kenjaku even more vulnerable. Kenjaku would kiss his teeth and say that he didn't want to have to pull this card early, but he doesn't have a choice. As Yuji would rush forward, Kenjaku would then use his anti-gravity technique reversal, slamming Yuji onto the ground. He would laugh and say that he was wrong to underestimate Yuji. Yuji is strong in his own right. However, Kenjaku has been planning for this for a whole month. He knew if it wasn't Gojo that was going to be the one to kill him, it was probably Yuji. so he was making preparations in order. He just didn't expect Yuji to be this strong altogether. Yuji would be on the ground attempting to push himself up, just barely being able to pull himself up. Kenjaku would be even more surprised, realizing that Yuji was actually a problem, and that he needed to finish this immediately. Kenjaku would then stop using the reversal technique of the gravity manipulation and begin to use it regularly, sending Yuji upward. Yuji, already pushing himself upward, would begin to fly straight up, being caught off guard by the sudden change in gravity. With Yuji pushing himself far into the air, Kenjaku would then release the technique. As Kenjaku would begin to laugh, preparing an Uzumaki. As Yuji would be falling high from the sky, Kenjaku would scream out to Yuji that he was going to put half his supply of cursed spirits into this Uzumaki, and that even if Yuji were to take the attack head on and survive, he would basically be at death's door. Yuji would do nothing but simply continue to soar down straight towards Kenjaku, as Kenjaku would then begin to fire off the Uzumaki. As Yuji seeing the Uzumaki shoot straight towards him, he would begin to start chanting, "Scales of Dragon, Iniquity, Vitriolic," pointing his finger down directly at Kenjaku and the Uzumaki. Yuji would send down a gigantic dismantle slash that was covered in blood. Kenjaku would look on surprised and almost amazed. As the two attacks would connect, Yuji's slash would cut straight through the Uzumaki, heading directly towards Kenjaku. However, just then, Kenjaku would summon a horde of cursed spirits, as well as attempting to dodge out of the way. As it would connect with every single cursed spirit, slashing through all of them, Kenjaku would just barely make it out of the way in time, with his hand being sliced off by Yuji's dismantle. Kenjaku would simply believe that he could use reverse curse technique and heal his hand right back. However, being sliced by that dismantle had an effect on Kenjaku. The dismantle had an effect where it was wrapping around Kenjaku's wound, and being empowered by the chance, it was cutting into Kenjaku's wound, making him bleed profusely, while at the same time not allowing Kenjaku to use reverse curse technique on his hand, simply because the effects of the cut were too much. Kenjaku would be wasting his cursed energy attempting to heal his hand, so instead, Kenjaku would summon another centipede-like cursed spirit, wrapping it around his wrist to stop the bleeding. It was the only way Kenjaku was going to be able to continue this fight without bleeding out. Kenjaku would simply let off a smile and say that he can't believe it's come down to this. Yuji would land on the ground, crashing into it, immediately using cleave on the ground again to disrupt Kenjaku's footing. He wasn't going to let Kenjaku get a single breath. He would close in the distance once again, as Kenjaku would simply tell Yuji that this was enough. Kenjaku would say the words domain expansion, womb profusion, as a tree of grotesque human faces would begin to grow behind Kenjaku. However, this wouldn't stop Yuji. He would continue his push forward, attempting to strike Kenjaku before he had the chance to fully develop his domain. However, it was simply too late. Yuji would be hit by the sure hit effect of Kenjaku's domain, causing a somewhat huge explosion around Yuji. Yuji's arm would be severely broken, as well as the armor on his face being cracked. Yuji would immediately attempt to use simple domain. However, it would be stripped away almost immediately, causing Yuji to be struck again by the sure hit effect. Kenjaku would then begin to laugh, telling Yuji that he was an idiot, believing that he could kill Kenjaku, all because he was a little angry. Kenjaku has been planning things for thousands of years. He's lived for so long and seen so many things. He wasn't going to allow a tool that he created to stop him. He would begin to laugh and say, "Yuji Itadori, you were by far the most exciting experiment that I've ever come up with. It's such a shame that I have to see you die now." However, Yuji would then begin to laugh, as Kenjaku would be confused. Yuji would say that he finally gets it now. He understands what Gojo was trying to teach him. He understands what Sukuna was trying to teach him. A domain, a true interpretation of one's technique. However, Yuji simply couldn't figure it out, because neither of the techniques that he had accumulated were his. Each was given to him by something or someone. But just like he made the technique his own and turned it into something that would suit him, he was going to do the same thing here. Even if it was ugly, even if it wasn't complete, he was just going to push it out, become just as greedy as he's always been. Yuji would stand up using reverse curse technique on himself, healing his body completely. Kenjaku would note that had to have taken a large amount of cursed energy in order for Yuji to heal his body that much. He had healed 2 completely broken limbs, and he was sure to have broken bones inside of his body as well. Just as Kenjaku's sure hit effect would begin to attack Yuji, Yuji would then say the words domain expansion, lacerating blood prison, as both Kenjaku's domain and Yuji's domain would begin to clash, with Kenjaku being surprised that their domains were clashing instead of his domain just simply overtaking Yuji's. At the same time, Kenjaku would realize he wasn't aware of what the sure hit effect would be inside of Yuji's domain. Being lost in thought, Yuji would immediately capitalize off this, rushing straight towards Kenjaku. Kenjaku would gather himself immediately, preparing himself for Yuji. As Yuji would strike Kenjaku, Kenjaku would block the attack, as Yuji would send a strong right towards Kenjaku. However, at the same time, blood would begin to pour out from the walls of the domain, sending slashes directly towards Kenjaku. Kenjaku would realize that if it was a sure hit effect, that blood wasn't going to miss no matter what he did. However, he would then look down at his arm and realize Yuji is also using cleave on his hands, which would send smaller gashes into Kenjaku's arm. This was bad. If Kenjaku was hit by those blood slashes, as well as Yuji's cleave at the same time, it would generate almost the same effect, but instead of Yuji sending regular slashes, it was guaranteed to hit, and it would dig into his skin. But Kenjaku's domain was still active, so the sure hit effect would begin to attack Yuji. It would strike Yuji, blowing his left arm off. However, the blood from Yuji's domain will begin seeping out of the walls once more, attaching itself onto Yuji's arm, creating a pseudo arm and hardening. Kenjaku would be even more confused on what the hell this domain was. The blood was attacking as well as protecting Yuji, giving him limbs. Kenjaku needed to break Yuji's domain, or at least beat Yuji to the point where his domain is no longer active. Yuji would send another left, striking with his left hand this time. Kenjaku would attempt to dodge out of the way. However, again, the blood would pour from the domain, sending a slash directly towards Kenjaku. The slicing blood would strike Kenjaku and begin to dig into his skin. But since he wasn't hit with cleave, it wouldn't affect him that much. However, Yuji's assault was not done. He would send another punch, going for Kenjaku's chest. Kenjaku would back up, but another slash would come. Kenjaku would kiss his teeth, as miniature Uzumakis would form and strike Yuji once more. It would crack his armor. However, yet again, blood would pour from the domain, traveling over to where Yuji is and fortifying his body. Kenjaku would realize he's in danger. At the momentum Yuji's going, the blood pouring from the domain would continue to wrap around him, only fortifying his armor even more. It would allow Yuji to continue to get closer and closer, closing combat, while at the same time, each strike, even the ones that Yuji misses, will continuously have lasting effects on Kenjaku. So even if Kenjaku still had his domain active, at a certain point, if the blood is to harden and get thick enough, Kenjaku's domain wouldn't be able to do anything at all to Yuji. Kenjaku would then realize that this domain was perfect for Yuji's fighting style, allowing him to close in the distance while having perfect offense as well. It didn't matter if Yuji wasn't able to land an attack on you. Eventually, when the blood wraps around you and your entire body is being slashed over and over with blood, with each cut getting deeper and deeper, it's going to slow you down over time, and eventually, Yuji will come out on top. His domain was meant for long-lasting battles. As long as Yuji was able to take the attacks, he would evolve from it and continuously get stronger, while you're forced to sit there and get weaker inside of his domain. Kenjaku would then let off a nervous smile as Yuji would be closing in once more. However, this time, striking with his right once more, Kenjaku could barely lift his arm, as the blood was simply cutting too deeply inside of Kenjaku's arm. Hardening blood that was continuously slicing away at your flesh. Yuji would strike, hitting Kenjaku in the ribs as he would crash him into his own domain, causing it to collapse. As Kenjaku would sit there laughing, the domains weren't clashing anymore, and there was nothing he could do. Trying to move even a little bit was completely agonizing for Kenjaku. Even if he were to try to use reverse curse technique here, the blood would just continue to slice away, causing him to lose an immense amount of cursed energy. Kenjaku would then realize this was the final stretch. He would then look at Yuji and tell him that even if he were to kill him, he would have to deal with the numerous cursed spirits that were going off inside of his body. Yuji would simply walk forward, as he would tell Kenjaku he doesn't care. He was sent here to kill Kenjaku, and that's all that mattered to him. Kenjaku may have been the person that put him on this path. However, everything still happened because of Kenjaku. Eating Sukuna's fingers, taking over his master's body. Yuji would say that he wasn't innocent, not in any way. However, Kenjaku is simply unforgivable. He ruined his life and turned him into something that he didn't even want to be. Yuji only wanted some slight excitement in his life, and he had that with Geto. Even if his master were to die, Gojo probably would have picked him up and he would have been on a different path. But Kenjaku came back, posed as his master, and Yuji fell for it for a while until he realized that staying with people like Kenjaku and the Jujutsu sorcerers wasn't good for him. He needed to find his own strength, and now he did. Yuji would then collapse his own domain, as Kenjaku would be confused. He would laugh and tell Yuji, did he not want to kill him? Yuji would say he wants to kill Kenjaku, but not with a domain, with his bare hands. Yuji would stand over Kenjaku and say that he has one last thing to tell him. He would uncover his face, breaking the mask, and Yuji would have a huge smile on his face, telling Kenjaku that he actually thanks him. Everything that's happened has been because of him. He wouldn't have found his way because of Kenjaku. He wouldn't have become this strong if not for Kenjaku's planning. Even the culling games, he wouldn't have found out his true self if Kenjaku didn't start that. So he thanks him. Yuji would tell Kenjaku that he was going to stop the culling games after he died, so none of it mattered. If Yuji was considered a game master, he would simply work around the rules. Kenjaku would simply laugh and say that it doesn't matter. His will be carried on. Yuji would simply tell Kenjaku to shut up. He would swing his fist down, crashing into Kenjaku's head. Continuously, over and over, Yuji would continue to beat Kenjaku's head in until he was nothing but a bloody pulp on the floor. He wanted to make sure Kenjaku was gone, for real. No brain, no nothing. Just a pile of blood on the floor. The second Kenjaku was dead, hundreds of thousands of cursed spirits would begin spilling out of Kenjaku, as Yuji would prepare himself for battle once more. However, watching from afar, Gojo would fall down, putting his hand on Yuji's shoulder, saying that he's got everything from here, and that he can rest now. Yuji would put down his guard for only a couple of seconds, but he could feel it. That fight took a lot out of him, a lot more than he thought it would. Now he understood why both Sukuna and Gojo wanted to make sure he was absolutely ready, and in that same moment, Yuji would pass out. As some time would pass, we would see Yuji wake up in a bed, with Urame by his side, with Yuji asking what was even going on. Urame would tell Yuji that he successfully defeated Kenjaku. However, after, there was a ginormous wave of cursed spirits that came from out of Kenjaku's body that Gojo took care of. Yuji would let off a long sigh, as Sukuna would then form a mouth on Yuji's cheek. He would then tell Yuji, good job. As both Yuji and Urame would look at each other, they would be absolutely flabbergasted that Sukuna told Yuji good job. Yuji would ask Urame if he was actually dead, with Urame telling Yuji that maybe they're both dead, and Kenjaku killed everybody. Sukuna would tell both of them to stop being idiots, and that he was giving praise where it's due. Kenjaku was a formidable foe, for Yuji at least. We would then see Megami walking through the door. He would look at Yuji and be relieved, saying thank goodness he's actually alive. Yuji would laugh and tell Megami that he said he wasn't going to die. As Gojo would then enter the room behind Megami, he would hold up a peace sign and tell Yuji that he was glad he was okay, with Yuji just smiling and saying that he wasn't going to lose to a loser like that. Sukuna would then form another mouth on Yuji's cheek. He would yell at Gojo, telling him that now that the brat is healed up, why don't they go a round or two to see who's stronger. Gojo would tell Sukuna that he still has to finish cleaning up all the other curses, so their fight would have to temporarily wait. Sukuna would laugh and call Gojo a weak coward, saying that of course he's making up excuses in order to not fight him. Urame would laugh, with Yuji letting off a long sigh. Megami would then tell Gojo that him and the other students could help with the curse cleanup if he wanted to have a friendly match with Sukuna. Gojo would laugh and stare at Yuji, asking him is he willing to transfer consciousness to Sukuna, as Yuji would simply smile, and markings would appear on his body, giving Sukuna full control. Sukuna would stand up immediately, sizing Gojo up and down. Sukuna would smirk and say, what are they waiting for? Is the honorable, strong and mighty Gojo Satoru scared he's going to lose? Or Gojo would simply say, nah, I'd win. And I think that's where I'm going to end it. If you guys want me to go in depth about how I think Garou Kuna would go against Gojo, let me know in the comments. I'll make a bonus part, but I think that's where I'm going to end this off. And after this, I'll continue with the Aizen and finish up the Offer 1 Yuji so I can hurry up and make the Anti-Magic Yuji. But yeah, thank you for listening, and yeah, peace.